All right. We have to talk about Lesson 12 on Tyranny. Let me press the button here. All right, folks, we're back. We're here with Lesson 12 from On Tyranny. And, we're going over all of the lessons from Timothy Snyder's book on, resisting authoritarianism. And it's called On Tyranny. It's very short. It's very digestible. There's even a graphic novel version of it, if you were so inclined, that's currently on sale on Amazon for $16. Hint, hint, wink, wink. But he also put together like a series of discussions about each lesson from his book. And I think that it's been pretty valuable to for us to kind of come up and prepare ourselves for what we are going to be facing in the coming years. So let's continue our journey here.
Hello, I'm Timothy Snyder. It's August of 2021. I am reintroducing my little book On Tyranny into the world. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. The first is that there's now a new edition of the book.
Paige Wilder, you're not understanding what I'm saying, and I can't get into more of this with you. I would recommend reading up more about the civil rights movement in its totality.
I've updated the text. It turns out that, as I suspected, the lessons in the book were not really about the Trump administration. The lessons in the book were really about us and our country. So we're still facing some pretty fundamental challenges. I've changed a bit in the book to help us look forward into the 2020s and into the 21st century. But more importantly, On Tyranny is appearing in October in a graphic edition with illustrations by the fantastic Nora Krug. These illustrations make the book, I think, not just more accessible, but also much better, much more profound, much more interesting. I find it so, and I hope you will too. So what I'm doing now is I'm revisiting the book by reading each of the lessons and thinking about the last 4 or 5 years, and also thinking ahead about how these lessons can...
Also, just as an FYI, the graphic novel edition is cool as hell. I mean, look at this. It's neat. This is neat stuff. Look at the graphical language. Oh my God, New Yorker. I wanted to look at one image. Oh my God. All right, here. See if, there we go. This is the image I wanted to share. Look at that. What a weird, evocative visual style. Anyway, go check out the graphic novel version, I guess.
Still be helpful. Today we're on lesson 12. I'm outside, as you see. Today we're on lesson 12, which is make eye contact and small talk. This is not just polite. It is part of being a citizen and a responsible member of society. It's also a way to stay in touch with your surroundings, to break down social barriers, and understand whom you should and should not trust. If we enter a culture of denunciation, you will want to know the psychological landscape of your daily life. So I guess that formula at the end, the culture of denunciation, is a good example of where I was coming from in writing this book. I'm a historian of Eastern Europe in the 20th century, which means I'm a historian of some of the worst events that humans have endured.
What book was that? That was On Tyranny's graphic edition. The book that we're actually discussing, Timothy Snyder's book.
At least in the past few decades. And the idea of a culture of denunciation is something which is very familiar to me from my historical work, maybe not so familiar to Americans. The negative purpose of this chapter, of chapter 12, of lesson 12, is that we should remember that people around us can change fast, and that only personal contact with them can keep us afloat. The only way to understand what's really happening around us is to keep up the basics of a social life.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons, by the way, that for the last few years now, one of my main pieces of advice has been to, get to know your neighbors, bake them some cookies, make friends with the people who live around you, obviously within reason. If you're living next to someone who's like, I'll shoot a liberal on sight, maybe don't bake them cookies, okay? But like, get to know the people around you, because making small talk with your local grocery bagger, doing stuff like that grounds you in the community, and making those actual human connections is something that will keep you informed about your local area. And also, when or if shit hits the fan, those are going to be the people that you can rely on most in your immediate vicinity.
But there's also a more positive way to read this lesson, a more constructive way to read this lesson. It has to do with making other people feel as though they're welcome. And this too comes from history. It comes from a dark moment of history. If you read first-person accounts of, let's say, Germany in the 1930s, or the Soviet Union for that matter in the 1930s, there's very often the heartbreaking moment. It comes before the worst. It comes before immigration. It comes before state persecution. It comes before death. It's the moment when the neighbor stops greeting you. It's the moment when somebody you've known your whole life crosses the street instead of making eye contact or shaking your hand. And it's that moment when people realize that something very bad is happening. It's at that moment that they realize that somehow society has turned. And so the point of this lesson is that as an individual, you can do your part to make sure that no one feels this way.
Yeah, I mean, this is also the red flag that, like, oh man, it's about to get way worse. The social fabric of society has been damaged in a profound way where even basic niceties can't be exchanged. He's not even talking here necessarily about building like deep and abiding friendships. He's talking about reading basic social cues from other people. We're already there, though. We are not already there. Again, if you think that we are already there, you lack imagination for how things can get profoundly worse.
If someone is an immigrant, or someone is of another race, or if someone has some reason to feel that in general or at the specific moment.
Yeah, Simric, that's a great example. When ICE came to deport a neighbor's wife, it was a neighbor that let her into their house so they could not be found at their house to be deported. Yeah, stuff like that. Common acts of decency. They're going to become more important. And you need to take, as I've been saying, this is a time of increased responsibility where chance and circumstance may thrust upon you, something that you're going to have to make a decision about. You're going to have to make a decision about whether to open your door to someone you don't know that well in order to keep them safe.
They're being left out. They're being pushed aside. Small gestures can...
The common decency of common folk is radical in the face of authoritarianism. And I think what this lesson is getting at is the need to really highlight that and to pay attention to that element of common decency, because when it gets withdrawn, that means you are a target, and it means things are going to get bad very quickly.
Make a big difference. Even more positively, the idea of making eye contact and small talk is about keeping us in the real world. If we just make sure...
Oh, well, Silver Scale, I'm talking about in the United States. I can't speak to whichever dictatorship you are in. Obviously, it might be that bad there. Genuinely don't know.
Making small talk with a few people every day, that we're making eye contact with a few people every day, if that's a kind of natural discipline for us, it's also a way of keeping us out of the digital world.
But it's not that bad here yet.
It's a way of checking.
Oh, well, if you're saying it's that bad in the United States, you need to do better.
Have you seen any videos by Moon Chanel? He covers law, video games, and Eastern culture. has some videos on the gender war in Korea, East versus West portrayals of trans characters, and how some places accept trans more than gay.
I have not heard of Moon Channel. I will check them out. Thank you for the $20 super chat. And the reason I'm trying to encourage people to have those small interactions and to get to know their neighbors and such is because for a lot of people, they are isolated. But they're isolated not because of government action. They're isolated because of capitalism and the constraints of capital. They're isolated because of a lot of different factors. But those factors can be overcome by simply doing a bit of extra work. And so the reason I'm talking about this is because while the United States is fairly isolated, it's not isolated in the same way that other countries are. Not yet. What he's talking about here is the point at which your neighbors who you've known and who have treated you one way for their entire lives and the entire duration of your relationship suddenly stop treating you that way. We're not there yet. It can get a lot worse than it is right now. Donald Trump isn't even in power yet.
What happens to us in the digital world. It's a way of making sure that we can still deal with other human beings. It's a way of keeping ourselves human. And then finally, another thing about this eye contact and small talk. I get all the time the question, how am I supposed to talk to people who disagree with me? How am I supposed to reason with people who seem unreasonable to me? How am I supposed to deal with the former friend?
Not gonna lie, a lot of LGBT folks isolate themselves and need to go out into their communities. I fucking get it. I'm an autistic trans woman who's gay. Like, I get it. I get that LGBTQ people isolate themselves. I get that a lot of people who watch my channel are socially awkward folks. I get it. But that's part of the reason why I hammer home about the need for you to build these connections up. Again, like, I'm sorry, but the idea that, like, oh man, we're already at the level of social isolation and alienation that dictatorship and authoritarianism can bring is ridiculous. We're not there yet. If we were there, it would be a lot harder for me to do my show. If we were there, you know, we would be talking about much different forms of, like, interacting with your community. Okay? We're currently in a period where things are not bad yet. And if you think they are bad, well, I've got news. They're going to get worse. And that's why, as a community, we're building up the idea of mutual aid so that we can help each other when things get worse. How worse are they going to get? I don't know, but I think they're going to get pretty worse. And what we're talking about here, when we're talking about these isolation practices, and the idea of, like, neighbors abandoning you or, you know, friends icing you out, this idea is the reason they're doing that is because they're scared and want to protect themselves because the state could come and arrest them. We're talking that they're doing that because they feel in danger for associating with you, or they implicitly understand that by associating with you, their position in their job or society could be affected in a negative way. And we're not there yet, guys. To argue that, like, the police are going to arrest you because you and it put you in prison because you say hello to your neighbor, we're not even at Red Scare levels of, like, isolation. Now, some of you might individually isolate yourselves because you don't feel safe in your communities, but that is not a widespread thing yet. And you can go out into your communities and find, like, support groups for LGBTQ people, and I encourage you to do that. But we are not at the point where your local grocery store is going to ice you out of everyday small talk because they're afraid someone might be listening. And I know that it's hard for some people in this community. I know it's hard for me to put myself out there and talk to like strangers and build that kind of rapport. But we gotta do it. It's important. And it's gonna make, if we do it now, it's gonna make the times ahead a little bit easier.
Or the relative who takes views which just seem not to conform to reality. And the answer...
Oh yeah, for undocumented immigrants, you absolutely. I think for undocumented immigrants, you should get to know your friends and neighbors to such a greater degree because they are going to be the people who might be able to shield you if bad actors come to your door. No, but hypervisor, that's a slightly different issue. Your neighbor isn't talking to you because she fundamentally disagrees with you on a political position. She didn't stop talking to you because she's worried police might arrest her. She stopped talking to you because of an interpersonal disagreement. And, like, that is a different thing than what is being discussed here. I still worry she's going to be a fucking snitch. Well, that's the thing. When shit does hit the fan, you know she's not safe. So you've already learned something important.
The answer to this is there is no magic bullet. There is no way to solve this problem. But what we can do is we can remind one another that we're all people. And this is in itself very important. If you make eye contact, if you make small talk, if you hear somebody out every once in a while, at least you're reminding them that you're another human being. And even if you don't convince them, and you won't, you probably won't, at best you can plant a seed, and if other things line up, that seed may come to fruition later on.
Yeah, by the way, we don't live in a video game world where you can just like chat up folks and like increase your relationship meter into like the safe zone. This is not an exact science. This is not a surefire thing. We're talking broad strokes here. We're talking broad strokes. Some people are just going to dislike you because they dislike you. Some people are going to dislike you because they're bigoted. But those aren't the people you need to pay attention to. I mean, learning that they're bigoted or that they dislike you is important in of itself because it helps keep yourself safe. It helps you keep others safe from those people. But ultimately, what we're talking about here are the barometers of much nastier things coming down the pipeline.
But even though you can't persuade other people, what you can do is remind them that you're a person. And because so much of what is wrong when a democracy fails has to do with dehumanization, this is already a big deal. So much of what is going wrong in our democracy and democracies around the world has to do with the ability of people, often with the help of the internet, to dehumanize other people, to turn away, to see them as objects, to see them as something else. So the small things that we do, even if we're not satisfied, even if they're a little frustrating, even if they're hard, can make a difference in that way as well. So this was lesson number 12. Thanks for being with me.
That was surprisingly thought-provoking. I didn't expect the lesson titled "Make Eye Contact and Small Talk" to be quite as controversial. But, here we are. Lesson 13, practice.
Hello, I'm Timothy Snyder, and I'm speaking about my book on tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. The first is it's been 5 years almost, believe it or not, since I wrote the book in late 2016. A great deal has happened. But the second reason, the better reason, is that there's now a new edition of the book, a graphic edition, illustrated by the fantastic Nora Krug, in which I've used an updated text, and she's illustrated this text to give the book, I think, a much broader resonance. So as I've done this project, I've returned to the lessons, and what I'm doing is making 20 little videos, one about each of them. It's August 2021. I'm in Poland, and the lesson we're talking about today is number 13, which is practice corporeal politics. I'm going to read it and then make a couple of remarks. So, practice corporeal politics. Power wants your body softening in your chair and your emotions dissipating on the screen. Get outside. Put your body in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people. Make new friends and march with them. Like a lot of lessons in this book, at first glance, the logic might not seem political. And
he's essentially telling you to touch grass. He's telling you to touch grass and talk with people. Talk with new people. Develop in yourself an interest in other people and their welfare and how they're doing, what they're up to. You know, it is hard for me to overstate the ability having genuine curiosity, or at least a curiosity that seems genuine, how important and valued that can make a stranger feel. So when you go out there and touch grass, you know, talk a little bit with someone. Whether it's, someone that you are, standing next to in line while waiting for food, or, someone you're sitting next to on the bus, or be a little bit irritating and overcome that social distance between the two of you to maybe come up with a conversation. Have a little bit of a back and forth, because that will ground you in reality and provide you more avenues of action. And in turn, more avenues for people to act in your behalf.
And this is very important, because where we end up politically...
I'm Hypervisor, I'm not talking about actual grass when I'm saying you need to get out and touch grass.
Often has to do with actions or thoughts or moods of ours which are not political or which are pre-political.
Hey, Sam.
It's a mistake to think that politics always comes first and life comes later. It's more often the case that the way we live our lives enables us or disables us from carrying out certain forms of politics. Just moving our body or just being in public is a good example of this. One way this is true is...
Well, Stardust Bun, I think another important element to add there is that, most of the country doesn't vote. Most of the country wasn't for Kamala Harris or for Donald Trump. Most of the country wasn't compelled to show up at all. But they still have a role in all of this, They can still be the people you talk to and get on your side. You can radicalize unaligned folks.
It's just psychologically. Whether or not we get out of the house, whether or not we're with other people, whether or not we physically move around, has a tremendous influence on how we feel about the world. After more than a year of COVID, I don't really need to explain this. COVID has made this point for us. Being alone, being inside for too long with too much screen time makes us depressed. It makes us vulnerable to bad politics. I'd go so far as to suggest that...
Wait, I thought it meant to actually touch grass and sit in it and stuff. No, it just means go outside. Go outside, walk around your community. If your community doesn't have that much grass, it doesn't mean actually go find grass to touch. Though, if you want to make that a mission one day, go for it. But what it means is go out and walk the streets, learn your local community, learn who you live next to. Go do something fun. Go to the local park, swing on the swing set. Go pick flowers. Go build a snowman. It's not even go outside and exercise. It's just go out and do something. It can literally be just go to your local mall that isn't quite dead yet and sit in one of the public areas and just people watch. It can be as simple as that.
the terrible events in the US in late 2020, the coup attempt that was carried out by Mr. Trump and the support he had for that had something to do with people being too much on their own, spending too much time in front of the screen, being too much separated from other people, being too much exposed to the falseness that you can find on the internet. The second reason why corporeal politics is important, being outside is important, being with other people is important, is just sociological. Being outside, being in physical contact with other people, mixes things up. If all we have is virtual contact, the virtual contact is predictable. The whole way that social media works is to classify you, to sort you out by some lowest common denominator, and then to get you in a virtual space with other people, or bots for that matter, who share the same characteristics. If you're outside, if you're at a protest, if you're at a march, or if you're just joining an organization, you're going to meet people that the internet would not have you meet.
Yeah, if you were to say, I don't know, join DSA, or actually be one of those people who starts showing up to your local Democratic Party meetings. They only happen once a month. In the evening, you can do it. And 90% of actually engaging in political change for your local area and state, and even on the national level, 90% of the work is just showing up to those goddamn meetings, okay? I promise you can make a difference. And not only can you make a difference, you can also meet other people and do what he's talking about. That is another way of touching grass. You don't even have to talk to anyone for your first several meetings. You can just show up, listen, and then leave. And that still counts.
You're going to encounter people who are new. You're going to be able to mix things up. You're going to become a better and more interesting person yourself. The third reason why what I'm calling here...
My neighbors are already disagreeable, then go one door over. And if you don't have anyone like in your immediate vicinity, go find a group of people that you can like and care for, who have mutual interests with you.
Corporeal politics is so important, is moral. There's a reason why we say taking a stand.
Just all of the stuff that I'm recording, I'll eventually post on the channel. The main issue is that I have been engaged in having mental breakdowns because of the holidays, and also a lot of IRL stuff during the holidays. And I edit a lot of my stuff myself, so it's, you know, hard to get things out. But I'm going to be getting my butt in gear later this week after a lot of IRL stuff that I have to do. One of which is the reason I'm staying up until 4 o'clock in the morning instead of going to sleep right now.
A stand is a physical action. It's not just something that you do by saying that you're doing it. Taking a stand involves getting your body someplace where you'll be recognized, where you'll be with other people, where you're making a point.
But the only thing I have in common with them is that we don't like seeing people treated inhumanely. But this is the thing. They're one pillar of the two-party duopoly. And there is no current viable path to breaking that two-party duopoly. However, if you show up to the Dem meetings, which almost no one does, if you show up consistently, you can literally change the policy of like your city. You can change the policy of your town. You can change the policy even of your state. We have people in chat who have changed state-level policy for the better and in a more progressive direction. You can be that person who pushes better politics into the Democratic Party. And you know what? They're going to resist you every step of the way, but 90% of the work is just showing up to the goddamn meeting. So if you have a problem with the Democratic Party program, show up to the meetings. Make it better. Because if enough of us actually did that, it wouldn't be the neoliberal shambling husk it currently is.
Not just with your mind or with your mouth or with your fingertips, but you're making a point by choosing to put your body in a certain place at a certain time with other people. That's what taking a stand means. That's why it's called taking a stand. And this leads to the last point that I wanted to make about corporeal politics: visibility.
Yeah, honestly, Zia Spots, excellent contribution there. A great way to connect with other people is simply by paying them compliments. If you want to build positive rapport with people, compliment their shoes. Compliment a piece of jewelry they have. Compliment their flannel or their jacket or something like that. You know, like you can be someone, you can even compliment how they carry themselves. You know, not in like a creepy way, but you can just be like, hey, I really like your vibe. And that sticks with people. By the way, this especially works on men. Okay? Men almost never get compliments. Okay? If you compliment a man, they're going to remember that. They're going to remember you, and you just probably built a very positive bridge with that person. Now, granted, if you're a lady, they might think you're flirting with you, and granted, if you're a man, they also might think that you're flirting with you. But, you know, or you're flirting with them. But, you know, we're talking about building relationships here, and, you know, you're going to encounter dipshits who are going to misinterpret anything you do. So, you know, take a little bit of a risk. Yeah, say please, say thank you, smile. Smiling is important. Being polite in general will get you far.
Unforgettability. Things that happen in the virtual world come and go. They influence us, they matter, they mess up our minds. But what happens in the real world has a kind of staying power in human memory. The Black Lives Matter protests, for example, in the US in 2020, most of them were not recorded by the media. The tremendous scale of those protests was not, I think, correctly recorded, but the people who took part in them remember them. So I was quite sick in late 2019, early 2020. When I got out of the hospital, the first physical thing I did was get dressed up and go to a Black Lives Matter protest. Am I ever going to forget that I did that? Of course, I'm never going to forget that I did that, because I was with other people. I was doing something that I cared about. Unpredictable things happened around me. I met people I wouldn't have met otherwise. And that has a reality. The reality isn't just political, of course, and that's the whole point. The point is that the things that lead us to do the right things in politics often have to do with what we do with our bodies, what we do with ourselves. And that's the point of lesson 13, which is practice corporeal politics. Thanks.
I think that's a really good point, too. And like, the idea that politics is made by people, and people have a physicality to them. You know, people have bodies, people need air, people need food, people need water. And like, we often talk about these things in abstracts while forgetting, like, people also socialize with their bodies. People also build power with their bodies. And like, that's part of why getting out into the real world and being able to look someone in the eye and pay them a compliment can in fact be a radical act that builds bridges and builds connections with folks who are going to want to work with you in the future, who are going to be like more inclined to help you, and you more inclined to help them, because you have this, you know, relationship that is built in the physical. It's not merely a digital construct. Yeah, exactly, Silver Scale. Take up space. You know, when you physically take up space, it's easier to take up space in someone's life. Yeah. All right, folks, I have to go because I have so many things I need to get done, and sleep is not one of them.